Hello there. Welcome to my YouTube channel. Tonight, we're going to step back through the centuries to a time when the world moved at a different pace, a quieter pace. We're going to explore the life of a medieval monastery scribe, not a knight, not a king, not even an abbot, just a scribe. Someone who spent their days copying letters onto parchment, one careful stroke at a time. There's something rather peaceful about it, really. The scratch of quill on vellum, the smell of oak gall ink, the slow accumulation of words across a page. So, settle in, get comfortable. We have all the time in the world. After all, a scribe from the 12th century wouldn't rush, and neither shall we. Let's begin. Picture, if you will, a long room with tall windows, not large windows, mind you. Glass was expensive, and even in monasteries it was used sparingly. These windows are narrow, designed more to let in light than to provide a view. And the light is important. Everything in a scriptorium revolves around light. The room is on the south side of the monastery, naturally. This isn't an accident. The architects who designed these buildings centuries ago understood that scribes would need the sun. They would need it to fall across their desks from morning until late afternoon. Because copying manuscripts is detailed work, precise work, the kind of work that requires you to see every hairline stroke of a letter. On cloudy days, the scriptorium feels different, dimmer, obviously, but also quieter somehow, as if the clouds have muffled not just the light, but the very air itself. On those days, scribes work more slowly. They lean closer to their pages. Sometimes they wait, stylus poised, for a cloud to pass. The room smells of parchment, ink, and wood. Old wood, the kind that's been slowly releasing its scent for generations. Oak, mostly. The desks are oak. Heavy, solid things that don't wobble when you press down with your quill. Each desk is tilted at a slight angle. Not much, just enough that the parchment sits comfortably, that your hand can move across it without strain. There are perhaps a dozen scribes in this room, sometimes more, sometimes fewer, depending on the season and the work hand. But let's say 12. That feels right. 12 men in brown robes sitting at 12 oak desks, working in near silence. Near silence, not total silence, because there are sounds, if you listen carefully. The scratch of quills, the occasional soft cough, the rustle of a page being turned, or a finished sheet being set aside to dry. Someone shifting in their chair, the distant sound of bells from the chapel tower marking the hours. But no conversation. Speaking is discouraged in the scriptorium. Some monasteries have strict rules about this, others simply expect it. The silence becomes natural after a while. You don't need words when you're copying text that was written 1,000 years ago. The words are already there, in front of you, waiting to be transferred from one surface to another. Let's talk about those desks for a moment, because they're not simple things. Each one has been carefully designed for its purpose. The writing surface, as mentioned, is tilted. Below that, there's often a shelf where you keep your materials, your extra quills, your knife for sharpening them, your pumice stone for preparing the parchment, a cloth to wipe away mistakes. Some desks have small weights, smooth stones usually, for holding down the corners of parchment when it tries to curl. Parchment does that, you see. It has a memory of the animal it came from. It wants to return to that shape. So you weigh it down, gently, at the corners, and remind it that it's a page now. The light from those narrow windows falls in long, dusty beams. You can see the dust motes drifting through them, especially in the afternoon when the sun is low. It's rather hypnotic, actually. Sometimes a scribe will pause in his work and just watch the dust for a moment, floating through the sunlight, never settling, always moving. The floor is stone, cold stone. This matters more than you might think. In winter, the cold rises through your feet, up your legs, settles into your bones. Some scribes wrap their feet in extra cloth, others simply endure it. After all, Christ suffered more than cold feet. That's what the abbot would say, at least. Along one wall, there are shelves, lots of shelves. These hold the books that are being copied, the books that have already been copied, the books waiting to be repaired. Some are chained to the shelves, not because anyone expects them to be stolen. These are monks, after all, but because books are precious, irreplaceable. The chain is less a lock and more a reminder: handle with care. The ceiling is high, vaulted perhaps with wooden beams crossing overhead. This serves a practical purpose. The height allows for better air circulation in summer, and in winter, well, in winter the warmth from the small braziers stays down at desk level where it's needed, mostly. Our scribe, let's call him Brother Thomas, rises before dawn. This is not unusual. All the brothers rise before dawn. The bell for matins rings while it's still dark outside, and Brother Thomas pulls himself from his narrow bed in the dormitory, his feet finding the cold floor without needing to look. He dresses in the dark, the same brown robe he wears every day, the same rope belt, the same simple sandals. There's a certain comfort in this sameness. No decisions to make, no wondering what to wear. Just the robe, the belt, the sandals. Day after day after day. Matins is held in the chapel. The brothers file in silently, their footsteps echoing slightly on the stone floor. They sing the psalms. Brother Thomas knows them all by heart now, after 20 years in this monastery. His lips move with the familiar Latin words, but his mind is already thinking about the day's work, the manuscript he's copying, where he left off yesterday. A particularly difficult passage coming up, with Greek words that need to be rendered carefully. After matins, there's a brief period of prayer, then lauds. Then, finally, as the first gray light begins to show through the chapel windows, the brothers file out to the refectory for breakfast. Breakfast is simple. Bread, usually. Sometimes porridge. A cup of weak ale. The bread is dark and dense, made from rye or barley. It's not particularly good bread, but it fills the stomach. Brother Thomas eats slowly, chewing thoroughly. There's no reason to rush. The scriptorium will wait for him. He washes his hands after breakfast. This is important, very important. You cannot work with manuscripts with dirty hands. The oils from your skin can damage the parchment. So he washes carefully, with cold water and a rough cloth, scrubbing between his fingers, under his nails. Then he dries them completely. Damp hands are no better than dirty ones. By the time he reaches the scriptorium, the sun has risen, not high in the sky yet, but high enough that light is beginning to angle through those narrow windows. Brother Thomas takes his seat at his desk, the same desk he's occupied for 15 years now. The wood is smooth where his forearms rest, worn smooth by the daily pressure of his arms as he leans forward to write. He begins by preparing his materials. First, the parchment. He has several sheets in front of him, already cut to size, already scraped and smoothed. But sometimes they need additional preparation. He takes his pumice stone, a light gray stone, worn smooth from use, and gently rubs it across the surface of the parchment. This removes any remaining irregularities, any tiny bumps that might catch his quill. The stone makes a soft, rhythmic sound as it moves across the parchment. Whisper, whisper, whisper. Brother Thomas's mind empties as he works. This is a task that requires no thought. His hands know what to do. The stone knows its job. The parchment gradually becomes smoother, ready to accept ink. Next, he checks his ink. It's kept in a small ceramic pot no bigger than a hen's egg. The ink is made from oak galls, those strange round growths you find on oak trees, mixed with iron salts and water. It's a rich, dark brown when wet, but it will dry to a deep black. He gives it a small stir with a thin stick. The consistency seems right. Not too thick, not too thin. He selects his quill. He has several, all cut from goose feathers. The best ones come from the left wing, actually. Something about the curve of those feathers makes them more comfortable to hold if you're right-handed. Brother Thomas is right-handed. Most scribes are. The quill needs to be cut properly. The nib must be sharp, but not too sharp. It must hold ink, but not too much ink. This is an art in itself, cutting quills. Brother Thomas takes his small knife, sharp as a blade can be, and examines the tip of the quill. It needs a bit of attention. He makes a few careful cuts, trimming the nib, creating a small slit up the center. He tests it by dipping it in ink and making a small mark on a scrap of parchment. The line is clean and even. Good. Now he's ready to begin. The manuscript he's copying is open on a stand to his left. It's a religious text, naturally. A commentary on the Book of Psalms by an early church father. Dense theological arguments, complex Latin sentences that seem to go on forever. But Brother Thomas doesn't read for meaning, not really. His job is simply to transfer the words from one page to another, to preserve them. He locates the place where he stopped yesterday. He remembers it well, the middle of a sentence, partway down a page. He dips his quill in the ink, taps off the excess against the rim of the pot, and positions the nib over his parchment. The first stroke is always slightly nerve-wracking, even after 20 years. That moment when the quill touches the parchment and the ink begins to flow. Will the line be clean? Will the ink spread too much? Is the parchment properly prepared? But the stroke is perfect, a smooth curve forming the letter C. He continues, the next letter, and the next. Slowly, methodically, his hand moves across the page. Time begins to blur. There's a rhythm to copying that's difficult to explain to someone who's never done it. It's not like writing your own thoughts, where you pause to consider what comes next. With copying, the next word is already there. You don't have to think about it. You just have to transcribe it. Your eyes move from the original to your page, from the original to your page, back and forth, back and forth. You read a few words, not too many because you need to hold them in your mind, and then you write them. Then you read a few more and write those, on and on. The hand develops a kind of memory for letter shapes. The C curves just so. The vertical stroke of the L is firm and straight. The crossing of the T happens at just the right height. After years of practice, your hand knows these things without your conscious mind directing them. The letters form themselves, almost. Brother Thomas can copy for hours like this. His mind enters a state that's not quite thinking and not quite not thinking. Thoughts drift through, but they don't stick. A memory of his childhood, perhaps. His father's workshop. The smell of wood shavings. Then it's gone, replaced by the awareness of the letter B forming under his quill. The light in the scriptorium changes as morning progresses toward noon. The dusty beams shift across the floor, climb the opposite wall. Brother Thomas doesn't consciously notice this, but some part of him tracks it. His body knows roughly what hour it is by the quality of the light. Around mid-morning, there's a brief break. The bell for terce rings, and the scribes set down their quills. They file out to the chapel for the short service. Hymns are sung, prayers are offered, then back to the scriptorium. The interruption is almost a relief. Your hand needs a rest. Your eyes need to look at something farther away than the page in front of you. Brother Thomas flexes his fingers as he walks back to his desk. They're stiff. There's a slight ache in the base of his thumb. This is normal. It will pass once he starts writing again. He settles back into his seat, picks up his quill, finds his place. The rhythm resumes. The words he's copying are in Latin, of course. Most of the brothers can read Latin, though some understand it better than others. Brother Thomas's Latin is excellent. He sometimes catches errors in the text he's copying. Small things, a misspelled word, a grammatical oddity. When this happens, he faces a choice: copy the error faithfully, or correct it. The rule is supposed to be copy faithfully. The original, errors and all, must be preserved. But sometimes Brother Thomas makes small corrections, very small ones, an obvious misspelling, a word that's clearly been transposed. Nothing major, nothing that changes the meaning, just tidying up a bit. He wonders sometimes if the scribe who made the original also did this, corrected small errors from the manuscript he was copying. It's a chain going back centuries, this copying of copying of copying, each scribe adding his own tiny adjustments, his own small interpretations, the texts slowly evolving, word by word across generations. But mostly he doesn't think about this. Mostly he just copies. His quill needs recutting every few hours. The nib wears down. The slit begins to spread too wide. The lines become less precise. When this happens, Brother Thomas sets down the quill, picks up his knife, and spends a few minutes reshaping the nib. His hands know exactly how to do this. The angle of the cut, the depth of the slit. It's automatic, like breathing. The monastery's cat sometimes wanders into the scriptorium, a large orange tom, well fed on monastery mice. He pads silently between the desks, occasionally rubbing against a scribe's leg. No one shoos him away. He's doing his job, after all, keeping the mice from nibbling the parchment. And there's something comforting about his presence, a living, breathing thing in this room of silent concentration. The cat jumps up onto Brother Thomas's desk at one point. He sits there for a moment, tail wrapped around his paws, watching the quill move across the parchment. His eyes follow the movement back and forth. Then, satisfied that nothing interesting is happening, he jumps down and moves on to the next desk. Brother Thomas smiles slightly, then returns to his copying. Let's talk about parchment for a while, because it's not like paper, not at all. Parchment is animal skin, usually calf, sheep, or goat. The finest parchment comes from young animals. Calf skin from an animal that died before it was born even. This produces vellum, the smoothest and whitest of all writing surfaces. But most parchment is not vellum. Most is made from ordinary sheep or goats, and it carries the memory of the animal it came from. If you look closely at a sheet of parchment, you can sometimes see the pattern of the animal's hair follicles, tiny dots across the surface. On some sheets, you can tell which side was the hair side and which was the flesh side. The hair side is slightly smoother usually, slightly yellower. Making parchment is a long process. First, the skin must be soaked in water to remove any remaining flesh and fat. Then it's soaked in a lime solution. This loosens the hair, which is then scraped off with a curved knife. More scraping follows, removing the last bits of flesh from the other side. Then the skin is stretched on a frame, stretched tight like a drum. While it's stretched, both sides are scraped again with a curved blade. This scraping is what gives parchment its smoothness. The more you scrape, the thinner and smoother it becomes. But scrape too much and you'll create a hole. Finally, once the skin has dried on the frame, it's removed and cut into sheets. These sheets are then treated with pumice or chalk to make them even smoother, to give them a surface that will accept ink without spreading. Brother Thomas thinks about this sometimes as he writes. The animal that gave its skin for this page, it lived, ate grass, slept in the sun, and now it's part of a book, part of something that will last for centuries potentially. There's something almost sacred about that transformation. The parchment has a smell to it, not an unpleasant smell exactly, just distinct, earthy, slightly musky. When you spend all day working with it, the smell gets into your clothes, your hair. Brother Thomas doesn't notice it anymore. But if he leaves the monastery for some reason, to visit another monastery perhaps, or to go into the nearby town on monastery business, he becomes aware of it again when he returns. The smell of parchment and ink that permeates the scriptorium. Different animals produce different qualities of parchment. Calf skin is the best, as mentioned. Smooth, white, durable. Goat skin is thinner, sometimes translucent. It takes ink well but can tear more easily. Sheepskin is somewhere in between. Each has its uses. For important books, Bibles, liturgical texts, books intended for wealthy patrons, the finest vellum is used. For practice sheets, for letters, for everyday documents, rougher parchment is fine. Brother Thomas is working on a manuscript that will stay in the monastery's library, so his parchment is good, but not the absolute finest. It's creamy white, smooth to the touch, with only the occasional small flaw. A thin spot here, a tiny scar where the animal once had a cut or scrape. These flaws have to be worked around. If there's a hole in the parchment, you plan your text to avoid it. If there's a thin spot, you use less pressure with your quill in that area. If there's a rough patch, you scrape it a bit more with your pumice stone before writing on it. The parchment wants to curl, as mentioned earlier. This is especially true in damp weather. The moisture in the air makes it flex and ripple. On very humid days, scribes sometimes have to stop work until the weather clears. The ink won't dry properly on damp parchment. It spreads and feathers. The letters blur. But today is a good day. Dry, clear. The parchment lies flat under Brother Thomas's hand. The ink flows cleanly from his quill. The letters form themselves in neat rows across the page. He works until his hand tells him to stop. Not because he's tired exactly, but because there's a slight tremor in his fingers, a sign that he's been gripping the quill too tightly, concentrating too hard. When this happens, it's time to pause, to set down the quill and flex his fingers, to look up from the page and let his eyes focus on something distant. Through the narrow window, he can see a strip of sky, blue today, with a few thin clouds drifting past. He watches them for a moment. They move so slowly, or seem to. Everything outside this room seems to move in its own time, disconnected from the measured rhythm of the monastery bells. Then he lowers his gaze back to the parchment, back to the words, back to the copying. Not all scribes are also illuminators. These are separate skills, really. A scribe focuses on text, clean, readable, accurate text. An illuminator adds the decorative elements, the colored initials, the borders, the small illustrations in the margins. Brother Thomas is primarily a scribe, but he's learned some basic illumination over the years. Nothing fancy. He's not one of the monastery's true artists, the brothers who can paint miniature scenes that look like windows into heaven, but he can manage a decorated initial letter here and there, a simple floral border, basic scroll work. For more elaborate illuminations, the manuscript will be passed to Brother Augustine or Brother Peter. They're the real artists. They work with gold leaf and ground lapis lazuli. They can paint a scene of the Nativity so small it fits in a circle the size of a coin, and yet every figure is perfectly rendered, every fold of cloth carefully shaded. But for today's work, Brother Thomas will be adding a few simple decorated capitals, nothing too complex. The letter I at the beginning of a chapter, extended into a long stem with leaves growing from it. The letter D, transformed into a partial circle filled with interlaced patterns. For this, he needs different materials. Colored inks, red mostly, made from crushed minerals or plant dyes. The red used in manuscripts is often called rubric, from the Latin word for red. It's used for headings, for emphasis, for marking important passages. Brother Thomas has a small pot of red ink at his desk. It's a brighter red than the brown-black of his regular ink, almost orange in certain lights. He'll use this for the decorated letters. He also has a tiny pot of blue ink. This one is more precious. The blue comes from ground azurite, a semi-precious stone. It's expensive, so it's used sparingly, just for the most important initials, the ones that begin major sections of the text. Before adding any decoration, Brother Thomas must plan it. He looks at the space where the decorated initial will go. He measures it with his eye, considering how large the letter should be, how much space the decoration will occupy. Some scribes sketch the design lightly first with a stylus, making faint marks in the parchment that will be invisible once the colored ink is applied. Brother Thomas sometimes does this for complex designs, but for simple ones, he trusts his hand. He cleans his regular quill and dips it in the red ink. Then, very carefully, he begins to draw. The vertical stem of the letter I grows downward. He adds small leaves sprouting from it, first one side, then the other. Each leaf is a simple shape, two curves meeting at a point. Nothing elaborate. But when several of them are added, one below the other, they create a pleasing pattern. This work requires even more concentration than regular copying, because decorative work is visible in a different way. Text is meant to be read. Decorations are meant to be seen, looked at, admired even. So they must be precise, symmetrical where symmetry is expected, graceful in their curves. Brother Thomas works slowly. Each leaf takes perhaps 30 seconds to draw. He's not counting, but if he were, that's about what it would be. And there are a dozen leaves on this stem, so 10 minutes, more or less, for this one decorated initial. Time slows down even further during this kind of work. His breathing slows. His heartbeat seems to quiet. There's just the quill, the ink, the parchment, and the slow emergence of the design. When he finishes the letter I, he sets it aside to dry. Red ink takes longer to dry than the regular brown-black. Something about the composition. He'll need to wait a bit before continuing with the text around it. While he waits, he examines the other manuscript pages that are drying on a nearby shelf. Some are his work from previous days, others belong to other scribes. Each scribe has a slightly different hand, a slightly different way of forming letters. Brother Thomas can usually identify who copied a page just by looking at it. Brother Benedict's letters lean slightly to the right. Brother Martin presses harder with his quill, making darker, thicker lines. Brother Anselm has the most elegant hand of all, with perfectly proportioned letters that seem to dance across the page. Brother Thomas's own hand is neat and clear, but not particularly beautiful. He knows this. He's made peace with it. His job is accuracy, not artistry. Though sometimes, on a particularly good day when the light is right and the parchment is behaving and his hand is steady, he produces a page that pleases him. The letters aligned just so, the spacing consistent, no corrections needed. These pages are satisfying in a quiet way. He returns to his desk. The red ink is dry enough now. He can continue with the regular text. The bell for sext rings. Midday. Time for another short service and then dinner. Brother Thomas's stomach has been making small noises for the past hour. Not loud enough for anyone else to hear, but he's aware of them. He's ready for a break from the scriptorium. Dinner is the main meal of the day. There's bread again, but also a thick soup. Vegetables from the monastery garden. Cabbage, onions, beans. Sometimes there's fish if it's a feast day, or if the monastery's fish pond has been generous. Today, there's no fish, just the soup and bread. And ale, of course. Always ale. The brothers eat in silence, or rather in near silence. One brother stands at a lectern and reads aloud while the others eat. Today, he's reading from the Lives of the Saints, the story of Saint Anthony in the desert, tempted by demons. Brother Thomas has heard this story many times. His mind wanders as he eats, back to the manuscript waiting on his desk, that difficult passage with the Greek words coming up. He'll need to be especially careful with those. After dinner, there's a brief rest period. Some brothers nap, others walk in the cloister, getting fresh air and exercise. Brother Thomas usually walks. The sitting at a desk all day makes his back stiff. The walking helps. The cloister is a square courtyard surrounded by a covered walkway. In the center, there's a small garden. Not a practical garden like the vegetable plots outside the monastery walls. This is more decorative. There are herbs, yes, but also flowers. Simple ones. Roses. Lilies. In spring, there are crocuses and daffodils. Brother Thomas walks slowly around the perimeter of the cloister. 1 circuit. 2. 3. His hands are clasped behind his back. His eyes are lowered, as is proper, but he sees the garden in his peripheral vision. The colors, the movement of leaves in the slight breeze. Other brothers are walking too. They pass each other without speaking, though sometimes there's a small nod of acknowledgement. Brother Anselm walks very slowly, his head bowed, lips moving slightly. He's praying as he walks. Brother Martin walks more briskly, his face turned up to the sun. Everyone has their own pace, their own way of using this time. After perhaps half an hour, Brother Thomas returns to the scriptorium. The afternoon light is different from the morning light, softer somehow, less direct. The beams from the windows fall at a different angle across the desks. He settles back into his seat. His lower back gives a small protest, then adjusts. He picks up his quill, finds his place in the text. The afternoon session is usually shorter than the morning. There will be vespers in the late afternoon, then supper, then compline before bed. So perhaps 3 hours of work, maybe 4. Brother Thomas copies steadily. The words flow from the original manuscript to his page. Latin sentences describing theological concepts he doesn't fully understand. The nature of grace. The relationship between faith and works. Complex arguments building on other arguments, referencing authorities from centuries past. He doesn't need to understand, really. Just copy. The light continues to change. The shadows in the scriptorium lengthen. The beams from the windows climb higher on the opposite wall. Brother Thomas finds himself squinting slightly. The afternoon light is dimmer than morning light, more golden. It's harder to see the fine details of the letters. Some scribes light candles in the afternoon, but this is discouraged. Candles are expensive, and there's the risk of fire. Manuscripts are irreplaceable. Monastery buildings are full of old, dry wood. One stray spark could be catastrophic. So, work continues by natural light for as long as possible. Brother Thomas's hand is tired now. There's a definite ache in his thumb. His shoulders are tense. He rolls them slightly, trying to relieve the tension, but doesn't stop writing. He makes a small error. His tired hand forms a letter incorrectly, an N where there should be an M. He notices immediately, of course. He always does. Now he has a choice. Scrape it off or leave it. For a minor error like this, scraping is the usual solution. He picks up his knife, the same one used for cutting quills, and very carefully scrapes at the surface of the parchment where the incorrect letter sits. The ink is thoroughly dry, so it scrapes off relatively easily, though it requires care. Too much pressure and he'll create a hole in the parchment. Too little and the ink will remain visible. He works at it patiently, small light strokes with the blade. Gradually the ink lifts away. He brushes the scrapings off the parchment with his fingers. Then he rubs the area lightly with pumice to smooth it again. Finally, he rewrites the letter correctly, an M this time. When he's finished, you can barely tell there was an error. There's a slight roughness to that spot on the parchment if you look very closely, but the letter itself is perfect. He continues. More words, more lines. The page slowly filling with text. The bell for vespers rings. Brother Thomas finishes the sentence he's working on. Never good to stop in the middle of a sentence, and sets down his quill. His hand is genuinely tired now. The ache has spread from his thumb to his entire hand and wrist. This is normal. This is every day. He joins the other scribes filing out to the chapel. Vespers is one of the longer services. More psalms, longer prayers. The light through the chapel windows is turning orange and gold as the sun lowers toward the horizon. After Vespers comes supper, a lighter meal than dinner. Bread and cheese usually, sometimes fruit if the orchard has been producing. The same ale, the same reading while they eat. Brother Thomas is tired now. Not just his hand, but all of him. The concentration required for copying is mentally exhausting, even though it might not seem like it. Holding your attention on small details for hours at a time takes something out of you. After supper, there's Compline, the last service of the day. The chapel is darker now. Candles have been lit. The brothers' voices singing the final hymns of the day sound different in the dim light, softer, more contemplative. Now you dismiss your servant in peace, they sing, according to your word. Brother Thomas files out with the others toward the dormitory. He's thinking about the manuscript waiting on his desk, how much he accomplished.